And now to our next conversation. Well, wild swings in asset prices following Russian invasion of Ukraine are prompting some investors to pay risk in their portfolios, fearing that the type of volatility seen in commodities in recent weeks could hit other markets. Let's get a sense of investor sentiment in Africa with Terence Hove, senior financial analyst at XNES. Great to have you on the program.
Good afternoon, Laddie. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Great to have you. Well, the global economy is quite rattled right now with geopolitical tension, rising global inflation. How do you see, investor sentiment in Africa right now?
That's a very good point that you've, pointed us into. I think the sentiment was picking up as I think coming from, the lockdowns that we had because of COVID. But now since the global crisis, the geopolitical crisis that has ensued since the end of February, the sentiment generally has been dampened. However, what has also been quite interesting is that some of the bouncers of the continent, such as the JSE, have actually performed fairly well, over the past couple of weeks. So while the sentiment is a bit low, given the global backdrop and uncertainty around the future due to the geopolitics that's currently ensued, it's looking favorable to some extent, given the dampenness at the moment.
Right, and bond markets have hit historic downturn. As central banks battle inflation. What's your outlook for African bond markets? We've seen Ghana, Egypt, raise rates.
Yeah, so I think Africa is no exception to what's happening globally. The chief thing is inflation. And coming from last year, if you remember, towards the middle of last year, going to the end of last year, the word that was being used around inflation was transitory. Now, that proved not to be transitory. It proved to be persistent. And as such, central banks had to respond accordingly. For example, we saw yesterday with the South African Reserve Bank increasing interest rates by 25 basis points. And as you mentioned, Ghana and the Egyptian Central Bank also increased interest rates respectively. Now, this is to combat inflation, which is rampant now, also compounded by this geopolitical tension that we have, crisis that we have at the moment. So inflation is somewhat, in its peak, and all the African countries are no exception to what's happening in the world at the moment.
Quite interesting. But which asset class do you see, African investors shifting to in 2022?
I think equities are looking quite favorable at the moment. This, as I mentioned earlier on, if we look at the performance of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, for example, which has actually picked up quite significantly over the past couple of weeks, is testament of that shift of investors into equities. I think also compounded by them looking for returns. So probably you look at some of the, commodity exporting companies that are probably doing very well given the elevated commodity prices. So investors will be chasing that kind of return from their capital.
Quite interesting. Well, Terence Hove, senior financial analyst, XNES, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you very much, Laddie. Have a good day.